Greek fire burned on water. It was a liquid flame. It decided the fate of empires. This was the secret weapon of the Byzantine Empire, a single lost formula. It protected a civilization for centuries. Then it vanished from human memory. A mysterious alchemist created it, a weapon that seemed to defy nature itself. The empire guarded the secret fiercely, so fiercely it disappeared forever. This ancient loss, it teaches us something about preserving our own vital knowledge. How far would you go to protect a discovery that could save everything you know? Constantinople was under siege. This was the 7th century. The Byzantine Empire, the world was closing in around it. To the east, a new power was rising, the Arab caliphates. Their armies moved fast with a kind of conviction that changed the map. They'd taken huge territories, and now they were looking at the biggest prize, the capital, the city on the Bosporus. This threat wasn't distant, it was a naval threat. The empire's life was the sea, the trade routes that fed it, the narrow waterways that protected it, and now enemy fleets were there, in those waters. Swift fleets, numerous, the old ways of fighting at sea, ramming and boarding, they weren't working. The empire was outmaneuvered, it was outnumbered. It was watching its defenses, these walls made of wood and sail, they were crumbling. Every sunrise over the Golden Horn, it didn't bring promise, it brought dread. The dread of seeing enemy sails, a civilization that had lasted 1,000 years. Its survival came down to one question: how do you defend a city surrounded by water when the enemy controls the waves? That fear, that necessity, it forges innovation. When every solution you know has failed, you have to invent something new. That pressure, it creates a miracle. And into that moment, into that extreme need, came a figure, a shadowy inventor. His name is almost lost, but his creation that would echo for centuries. Kalinikos of Heliopolis, he came to the city gates, but he wasn't a conqueror. He was running from one, a refugee, an architect, or maybe an alchemist. And he wasn't carrying gold out of that fallen Syrian city. He had something else, a secret, a formula, and this was the moment of crisis. The empire's best minds were looking for anything, any advantage. And then this outsider walks right into the center of power. He goes to Emperor Constantine IV. You have to imagine that meeting, a desperate emperor. A city just waiting, and this stranger making an impossible claim, a liquid that burns on water, a fire you can't put out. They could have dismissed him. Just another hopeful inventor with a dangerous idea, but the empire had no options left, so they listened, and by listening, they changed everything. Kalinikos is that idea, the displaced genius, someone whose world is shattered, carrying a piece of its knowledge to a new place. We don't really know his story. But we know his legacy. He became instantly the most important man in Constantinople. A fugitive turned into a savior, that individual ingenuity, meeting the vast resources and the desperate need of an empire. That created a pivot point, that partnership between one mind and imperial power. That's what brought the weapon to life, and it was a terrifying weapon. They had this weapon, a liquid sun. It wasn't like any normal fire. When it hit the sea, it didn't just go out, it spread out, it clung, it burned with this fierce light, and water couldn't touch it. The accounts from the time call it a sticky, gelatinous flame. It seemed alive, flowing across the waves, turning the sea into a sheet of fire. For the sailors who saw it, it was a nightmare. Their world, the solid deck, the cool sea, it all became an inescapable oven. Jumping overboard wasn't an escape, it was jumping into a burning lake. And they delivered it with this terrifying theater. The Byzantines mounted these great bronze tubes on their ships. They called them siphons. When they fired, they didn't spray quietly. They roared, a deep, thunderous sound, and from that roar came this continuous jet of liquid flame. arcing through the air to smother a ship dozens of feet away. The fire didn't just hit the wood, it stuck to it, it crawled. It seeped into every seam, every rope. If a sailor was splashed, the fire clung to his skin, to his clothes. A burn you couldn't pat out, you couldn't drown. In the chaos of a battle, with all the smoke and screams, this became a psychological weapon. An enemy force wasn't just fighting men. They believed they were facing the wrath of heaven, a divine fire wielded by God's chosen empire. That morale-shattering effect was often as decisive as the physical destruction. So that's the terror of it, this otherworldly thing, but it points directly to the mystery. What was in it? How could a liquid burn on water, the thing we use to stop fire? It's like the laws of nature were suspended. The answer is in the composition, a chemical puzzle so well guarded it was lost. To understand its power, you have to think like an alchemist. You have to wonder what ancient ingredients, mixed just right, could create a storm in a jar. The secret was a liquid that water couldn't put out. To understand it, you start with the fuel, the thing that made it all work. For a long time, people have looked at old texts trying to figure out what that main ingredient was. The best guess, the one that makes the most sense, is crude oil. Or a lighter form of it called naphtha. This wasn't modern gasoline, it was raw. It came right out of the ground in certain places. The Byzantines had a real advantage here. They had these oil seeps around the Black Sea, so they had a supply of this stuff that their enemies just didn't have. Think about that. The main thing you need for a superweapon, just bubbling up in your own land. It was a geological gift, a matter of security. Now people have proposed other things, pine resin, animal fats, but those don't fit the descriptions. They burn, sure, but they don't light on contact with water. They don't create a fire that spreads and floats. So crude petroleum or naphtha, that's the strongest candidate. It was volatile, so it ignited easily. It was a liquid, so you could pump it. And crucially, it was lighter than water. That's the key. Spray it on the sea and it doesn't sink. It floats, it forms a thin film, and then you light it. But petroleum by itself, that's not the whole secret. It burns, but not with that terrifying, clinging intensity the witnesses talk about. The additives, the things mixed into this base fuel, that's what changed it. The base was the canvas. The real artistry, the deeper secret, was in the mixture. The base fuel was volatile. It floated, but it was too thin to be a weapon. It needed to be controlled. It needed to stick. That's the second enigma. The thickener, this was the true alchemy, the step that turned a dangerous liquid into a directed, clinging nightmare. Without it, Greek fire would have been a splash. A brief flare. With it, it became a coherent stream, an adhesive stream. So what did they use? The speculation is a puzzle box. Some point to simple materials. Powdered lime, sulfur, but the most compelling theory involves a substance called quicklime. Quicklime is fascinating because of what it does with water. On its own, it's a powder, but when it gets wet, it doesn't just dissolve, it reacts violently. It releases a tremendous amount of heat, so imagine this mixture. You have your floating petroleum base, you mix in powdered quicklime, you pump this slurry out of your siphon. The moment it hits the sea spray, or the moisture in the air, or the hull of a damp ship, the quicklime activates. It heats up from within. It might even help ignite the fuel. More importantly, it could have caused the mixture to thicken, to congeal on contact, making it impossibly sticky. Other theories look at the Byzantine alchemical texts, substances like sal ammoniac, what we call ammonium chloride. This was known to their chemists. It could have altered the burning properties, created denser smoke, or helped stabilize the fiery brew. The exact recipe is lost, but the principle is clear. This thickener was the difference between a fire and a fireball. It gave the weapon its range, its accuracy, its terrifying persistence. It meant the fire didn't just land. It grabbed hold. It turned a naval battle into a contest against a substance that seemed to have a will of its own, and that made its secrecy absolutely paramount. If an enemy discovered the thickener, they could begin to reverse engineer the entire system. So this knowledge was compartmentalized, guarded even more closely than the emperor's own chambers. With the base and the thickener combined, the mixture was almost complete, but to become the weapon of legend, it needed one final, volatile element. The spark, the final secret, was spontaneous ignition, a fire that lit itself. That's what made Greek fire seem supernatural. It didn't need a torch or a flaming arrow or a spark. On contact with the sea, it just roared to life, and the answer is chemistry that feels like magic. Modern historians point to pyrophoric materials, compounds that ignite on contact with air or water. For the Byzantines, the likely candidate was something like calcium phosphide. You can make it from simple ingredients: bone ash and charcoal processed in a hot furnace. In a powdered form mixed into that oily brew, it would have been stable. But the moment the stream hit the moisture in the air or splashed onto a wet hull, a reaction would start. The calcium phosphide reacts with water. It releases phosphine gas, which ignites instantly in air. So water, the thing meant to quench a fire, became the trigger. That self-igniting feature was a tactical masterpiece. In the chaos of a naval battle, ships rocking, men shouting, the crew didn't need to manage an open flame on deck. They just aimed their bronze siphon and pumped. The fire was born in mid-air, a dragon's breath conjured from nothing. It made attacks faster, more reliable, and infinitely more terrifying. There's an alternative theory, of course. Some researchers suggest the ignition came from the siphon itself, a preheating mechanism. Maybe a brazier that superheated the bronze nozzle. The pressurized stream forced through that searing hot metal would ignite as it sprayed out. That's a more mechanical solution. But it still achieves that same shocking effect, a fire born from a cold tube. Whether by chemical magic or engineering, the result was the same, a weapon that appeared to wield the elements. A flowing, burning river that water could not stop, and that needed no outside spark to begin. It was a complete system, a volatile fuel, a mysterious thickener, and a trigger that turned the sea into an ally. With all three pieces, this theoretical formula was ready for its test. It was time to unleash the dragon. The formula was a secret and a terrifying one, but it was useless on its own. You needed a way to unleash it. They needed a delivery system, a machine of war, something that could turn that liquid into a directed storm, and that's where their genius really showed. It was in the marriage of chemistry and mechanical engineering. Their weapon was the Dromon, a sleek, fast warship, banks of oars, a single sail, and at the very front, built right into the prow, was the most fearsome part. A bronze tube, a siphon, often mounted behind a protective grating, and that grating was carved into the shape of a lion's head or a dragon's. So when the ship bore down, the first thing you saw was this gaping maw of a beast. And from that mouth the fire would roar. This wasn't some pot of burning oil to be tossed by hand. The siphon was part of a system. Inside the ship, the mixture was kept in large, sealed containers. And there were operators, men who were part chemist, part artilleryman. They'd work a pump. Historians think it was likely a force pump, an ancient design. Something perfected by engineers like Ctesibius of Alexandria centuries before. They'd use levers and pistons to pressurize the liquid, force it through a leather hose, up into that bronze tube at the bow. Firing it was a precise, dangerous ballet. One man controlled the pump's pressure, another aimed the siphon, which could probably swivel. On command, a third might open a valve. And you'd hear it, a deep, grinding roar from the pump, a hiss from the tube, and a solid jet of liquid would arc out over the water. It didn't drip, it didn't splash. It streamed, a continuous, focused beam of fire that could reach another ship dozens of feet away. That transformed the Dromon. it wasn't just a ramming vessel anymore. It was a mobile artillery platform, the world's first true flamethrower. Operating it took immense skill and even greater courage. These men worked in a cramped, dark space below decks, surrounded by vats of volatile fuel. A single spark, a mistake in the sequence, and they'd immolate their own ship from the inside. Their training was rigorous, shrouded in secrecy. They weren't just sailors. They were the keepers of the flame, a specialized unit. Their very existence was a state secret, and that integration, that's what made Greek fire a strategic asset. Not just a novelty, it was repeatable, reliable, deployable across the whole fleet. The Dromon and its Siphon turned a chemical curiosity into the cornerstone of naval doctrine for centuries. It meant any enemy fleet, no matter the size, had to face not just fire but a disciplined system of fire. A system that could appear from the dark, strike with precision, and vanish back into the smoke. And soon that system would face its ultimate test, against an armada that threatened to erase an empire from the map. 678, the Arab fleet arrived. A vast armada, years of conquest behind it, filling the sea approaches to Constantinople. Their confidence was absolute. The city's land walls were formidable, but the sea was its soft underbelly. They targeted the narrow channel, the Golden Horn, the city's protected harbor. They moved in, ships packed tight in the confined waters, a forest of masts and sails. For the defenders on the sea walls, it must have seemed like the end, a shadow falling across the water. But in the Byzantine arsenals, a new kind of ship was being prepared. Dromons fitted with bronze siphons. They were pushed into the water. They didn't look like much, just a few vessels against that multitude. The Arabs likely saw it as a desperate, futile sortie. They were wrong. The Dromons didn't engage in the old way. They didn't try to ram. They held their distance just outside of arrow range. Then, from their prows, a sound. A deep, guttural roar, and from that roar, jets of liquid arcing through the air. They weren't fiery bolts. They were continuous streams like water from a hose, but they were made of light. The streams splashed across the lead Arab ships, and where they touched, the sea itself caught fire. The liquid, lighter than water, spread out in a burning film. It clung to wooden hulls crawling up the sides. It stuck to sails, turning them into instant torches. Men who jumped into the water found the surface was aflame. Panic is too small a word. It was a primal, shattering terror. The orderly fleet became a chaotic mass of burning hulks. Ships collided as crews tried to turn around in the narrow strait. The smoke was so thick it blotted out the sun, a black pall over a nightmare. In a single afternoon, the confident armada was reduced to splinters and ash. The siege was broken, the empire was saved. This victory echoed far beyond the Golden Horn. It wasn't just a military success, it was a spiritual affirmation. For the people of Constantinople, it was proof. God had given them this weapon. They called it hygro per liquid fire, but they believed it was the fire of heaven itself. A divine shield for Christendom. The psychological impact was immense. For generations, the memory of that day would haunt any admiral who considered attacking the city by sea. It established a pattern. The empire didn't need a huge navy. It just needed its Dromons and its secret. It could defend its heart with a technological edge so profound it felt like magic. That first victory secured the borders. It bought time. It cemented Greek fire's legendary status. But legends are tested by time. The true measure of this weapon's legacy wouldn't be in its first spectacular use. It would be in its ability to endure. Could a secret guarded so fiercely survive the slow erosion of centuries, or was its very protection the thing that would lead to its disappearance? 40 years of quiet ended when the Arab fleets came back. This siege was different, bigger, more determined. The Umayyad Caliphate remembered the first siege, that fiery defeat. So they returned in 717, not just with ships, with a huge army camped outside the land walls. The plan was to strangle the city from both sides. To starve it out, once again, the empire's survival came down to its secret weapon, and the men who used it. The Byzantines had used those 4 decades. They'd improved the system, the Dromons were ready, the Siphons were polished, the operators trained in secret, they waited. The Arab fleet moved to block the harbors. Thousands of ships, some say. They were confident. Maybe they thought they had an answer this time. They didn't. What the Byzantines did next was a lesson. The Dromons shot out, not in a battle line, in quick, hard strikes. That roar filled the Bosporus again. The same nightmare on the water, ships turning into floating fire. But this time they added something. The records talk about floating fire devices. Imagine small boats, unmanned, or rafts, loaded with pots of the mixture set alight. They'd drift on the current, right into the packed enemy formations. It was a weapon that spread on its own, creating whole areas of fire you couldn't cross. The fear that created was huge. Now sailors had to dread more than the jets from the warships. They had to watch for these silent, burning things, drifting out of the smoke toward them. The attacks at sea were terrible, but they were just one part. That winter was famously brutal. The Arab army, stuck in the open, suffered. Their supplies were cut. Disease went through the camp, and then the Byzantine emperor made a move. He allied with the Bulgar Khanate up north. The Bulgars attacked the Arab land forces. It was a crushing defeat. That was the end. Trapped, the unbreakable walls in front, the relentless fire on the water, the freezing cold, and now a new enemy behind them. The great Arab army had no path. In the summer of 718 they left. It was a disaster for the caliphate. For Constantinople, it was more than winning. It was the miracle happening again. Those 2 sieges, a generation apart, they did something deep. They set Greek fire into the heart of the empire. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was part of who they were, a symbol of what made them special. They saw it as a gift from God, a sign of favor for their Christian empire. This was faith, not just talk. The weapon was like technological piety, guarding the secret, using it right. That proved they were righteous, the guardians of civilization against the tide. It became their legend, a story of salvation they told for centuries. Just its reputation, the memory of those burning seas, that became a deterrent. As powerful as the weapon, but for all that power, Greek fire wasn't magic. Its real role in the empire's long life was more subtle, more strategic. It went far beyond those 2 famous battles. The terror itself was a weapon. The destruction was real, of course, but the real power of Greek fire was psychological. It worked on the mind. Think about a sailor. His whole world has rules. Wood floats, water puts out fire. That's the reality he knows. Then he sees this stream of liquid shooting from a metal tube, hitting the water. And the sea itself catches fire. The thing that's supposed to keep you safe is now a wall of flame. Every instinct you have, it just stops working. You're not fighting an enemy anymore. You're facing something that shouldn't be possible. For a lot of people, there was only one explanation. It had to be divine. The Byzantines knew this. They understood it completely. They didn't just have a new weapon, they had a story, and they made that story part of who they were. Official statements, historians, church sermons, they all described Greek fire not as something that was made, but as something that was given. A gift from an angel to the Christian emperor. It was proof that God had chosen Constantinople, proof that their empire was the true faith's defender. This went beyond propaganda. It was theology mixed with technology. The men who worked the siphons, they weren't seen as just soldiers. In the public mind, they were like keepers of a sacred flame. A victory in battle was a miracle, a sign of God's favor that created an aura, a myth of invincibility that spread everywhere. The reputation moved faster than any ship. So for years, any admiral thinking of attacking Constantinople had to consider this. It wasn't just ships and walls, it was the liquid fire, the unknown. The supernatural fear, just the possibility of it could change plans. Fleets might take longer routes to avoid narrow waters where the Dromons were strongest. Sieges focused more on land because the sea approach felt doomed. Sometimes the threat was enough. The psychological shadow could cause hesitation, arguments, calling off an attack before a single shot was fired. The fear made their navy seem much stronger than it really was, but this advantage had a cost, a constant, heavy burden. To keep the myth alive, you had to protect the mystery. If an enemy ever captured a working siphon or a man who knew the formula, the spell would break. The weapon would be just a weapon, something to be studied, countered, copied. So the empire built a wall of secrecy around it. This wasn't just locking up a recipe, it was about controlling knowledge, and the system they built to guard the secret. That system became its own legend. A story of control so total, it would end up making the formula disappear. The secret was guarded with a ferocity that defined the empire. It wasn't just a recipe they kept. They built a fortress of silence around it. Knowledge was broken into pieces. The man who mixed the base ingredients probably never saw the siphon being forged. And the artisan who cast the bronze tube might not have known what would flow through it. Only a tiny, trusted circle held the complete picture, probably the emperor himself, his heir, and maybe a single, sworn guild of artisans. This wasn't just a job, it was a bloodline duty. Fathers passed fragments of knowledge to sons under oath within the same families for generations. Production happened in state arsenals behind guarded walls. To speak of the mixture outside that room was more than a crime. It was treason, the punishment was death. And this system was breathtakingly effective. For over 700 years, through countless battles, the formula never leaked, not to spies, not to defectors. No enemy ever captured a working siphon crew with the knowledge to replicate it. The Byzantines turned secrecy into a strategic asset as potent as the fire itself. But this intense protection created a profound vulnerability. The knowledge became so concentrated, so isolated, that its survival depended entirely on the survival of that tiny, protected circle. It was a flame kept alive in a single, sheltered lantern. If the wind ever blew that lantern out, the light would be gone forever, and that's precisely what happened. When Constantinople finally fell in 1453, the last guardians of the formula were lost. The workshops were looted and burned. The sworn families scattered or perished. The secret, protected so completely for centuries, died with its final keepers. This raises a question. Why was such a powerful advantage, a weapon that saved the empire time and again, ultimately lost? The answer lies in the nature of that compartmentalized knowledge. A system designed to prevent theft also made the knowledge incredibly fragile. It couldn't adapt. It couldn't spread. It existed in a vacuum, and when the state that curated that vacuum ceased to exist, the knowledge had nowhere to go. It simply evaporated. This is the tragic paradox. In trying to make the secret theft-proof, they also made it extinction-proof. The very walls they built to protect it became the walls of its tomb. The secret dies when its last keeper falls silent. That was the flaw in the Byzantine system. Their strategy worked for centuries. They broke the knowledge into pieces, gave each piece to a different sworn family. It was a perfect lock, but a lock only works if you have the right keyholders, and history isn't that neat. The empire's long decline was slow, full of internal strife. Palace coups were common, an emperor overthrown in the night, a trusted general executed on suspicion. In that atmosphere of constant suspicion, the continuity of knowledge was a fragile thread. If the master artisan for the Thickener died suddenly in an outbreak of illness before he trained his son, if the family operating the siphons was wiped out in a single naval battle, the secret wasn't written down, it lived in memory and muscle. It required a living chain, teachers and students all inside that protected circle. If one link in that chain snapped, a vital piece vanished forever. We see hints of this in the record. Later Byzantine emperors, even in the final centuries, still spoke of Greek fire with reverence. They still had weapons called by that name. But the descriptions become vague. The terrifying, self-igniting jets from bronze siphons give way to mentions of pots, burning pitch thrown from walls. The technology degraded. The complete system, the precise formula, the specialized siphon, the trained crew, it likely fractured long before Constantinople fell. The core secret may have been lost generations earlier, surviving as a legend, a few imperfect imitations. That's the historical irony. The extreme measures that made the secret theft-proof also made it extinction-proof. They protected it from outsiders so completely that they also protected it from the future. When the empire fell, there was no backup copy, no scroll in a monastery library, no guild in another city that knew the craft. The last lantern bearer stumbled and the flame went out. So it leaves a modern question. With all our advanced chemistry and historical research, could we recreate Greek fire today? The question has been there for centuries. Can we actually recreate that lost fire? Chemists and historians have both tried. It's a kind of detective story, trying to reverse engineer a ghost. You start with the clues we have, the floating fuel, the thickener, the self-ignition. So modern researchers mix their own versions. They use the most likely suspects. Light petroleum like naphtha, pine resin for stickiness, quicklime for the heat it makes with water, saltpeter, which was in early gunpowder to make the flame more intense. In labs, they combine these things and sometimes they succeed. They make a liquid that burns on water. It's a dramatic sight, a pool of flame dancing on a lab water bath. But here's the catch. These mixtures burn, but they rarely match the full picture from the ancient texts. The historical Greek fire didn't just burn. It was projected in a continuous jet from a bronze siphon. It stuck to surfaces with a glue-like persistence, and most mysteriously, it seemed to ignite itself on contact with the sea. Modern versions often struggle with one or more of these traits. A mixture might be sticky but won't project right. Another might burn fiercely but can be put out with water. Or it needs an external spark, so it loses that shocking, spontaneous combustion. Each near miss is a lesson, though. It shows the incredible sophistication in that original formula. The Byzantines weren't just throwing things together. They were masters of practical alchemy. They understood interactions we're still piecing together today. Their recipe probably wasn't a simple list. It was a precise sequence, a specific grade of naphtha from a particular seep, an exact proportion of thickener added at just the right temperature. Maybe even a trick ingredient, something like calcium phosphide for that water-triggered ignition. That's eluded modern experiments because we didn't think to look there. Every failed attempt deepens the respect. It suggests their knowledge was both profound and fragile. This scientific quest does more than chase a historical novelty. It connects to a broader, haunting question. How many other technologies from the ancient and medieval world have vanished just as completely? The recipe for Greek fire is a reminder. Knowledge isn't a permanent possession. It's a flame that has to be tended and shared and passed on, or it will flicker and die, leaving only the shadow of its light. That lost flame isn't alone. There are other ghostly wonders in history, technologies so advanced for their time they seem to defy the timeline, and then they vanish. Roman flexible glass, for instance, according to legend, a material so pliable a craftsman could hammer it back into shape, or the iron pillar in Delhi. Standing for over 1,600 years without rust, a forgotten anti-corrosion technique. These aren't myths, they're historical reports, real objects. Real achievements. Their methods were lost, and they whisper a different story about human progress. It isn't a straight, steady climb upward. It's more like a flickering light. Sometimes bright, sometimes dim, moving through a vast and windy night. War can snuff it out, social collapse can bury it, and as we saw with Greek fire, extreme secrecy can make it fragile. So fragile that a single break in the chain means it's gone forever. Each loss is a story of brilliant minds and dead ends, a reminder that knowledge isn't a permanent possession. It's a conversation, and when the conversation stops, the ideas disappear. So this pattern matters for understanding Greek fire. It lifts the weapon out of its isolated legend. It shows the Byzantine Empire's dilemma was a universal one. How do you balance protecting a vital secret with preserving it for the future? Their choice was absolute secrecy. That placed Greek fire squarely in this category of fragile marvels, a strategic asset of immense power, but with a built-in expiration date. By seeing it alongside the lost glass and the rust-proof iron, we stop asking just how it worked. We start asking a deeper question. What does its loss tell us, and the loss of wonders like it? What does it tell us about the nature of innovation itself? It tells us advancement is not automatic. It's a cultural project requiring not just discovery but transmission. So when we look back at the strategic impact of Greek fire, we have to see it through this lens. Not just as a weapon that saved an empire, but as a brilliant, fleeting spark in the long human struggle to keep the lights on. The shield was brilliant. But it was only a shield. The great victories for Greek fire were defensive victories. It broke sieges, it shattered fleets, it turned the sea into a moat of fire. But it couldn't march inland. It couldn't take back the lands the empire had lost. Syria, Egypt, North Africa. That's the strategic puzzle. It was phenomenal at protecting the heart, but useless for healing the body. So did it save the empire? That depends on what you mean by save. If saving means restoring the old glory, then no, the empire kept shrinking, new enemies, pressure on all sides. But if saving means giving a civilization the one thing it needs most time, then its role was decisive. It bought centuries, not decades, centuries. It secured the capital's seawalls for so long that the threat of a naval attack just faded from enemy plans. That security created a stable core. Behind that shield, life in Constantinople could continue. The economy reduced, but it functioned. The great libraries kept copying texts. Greek and Roman texts, theologians could debate, could write. The Orthodox Church kept its rituals, its art, its identity. That's the weapon's indirect legacy. It didn't win new lands, it protected a living culture. It let the Byzantine state become a resilient thing, diminished but it adapted. They reformed their administration. They developed new diplomatic strategies, playing rivals against each other. They evolved. The time Greek fire bought was the space for that evolution. Without it, the empire might have collapsed in the 7th or 8th century. 700 years before its actual end. The classical knowledge it safeguarded, the artistic traditions, the legal codes, all of that could have vanished. So think of it not as a sword for expansion, but as the guardian of a vault. The vault held something more valuable than territory. It held continuity. This defensive purpose explains its tactical limits. The weapon was rarely used in open battle. It was complex. It needed a prepared ship, a calm sea. It was a situational tool, perfect for the narrow waters around Constantinople, but of little use on the frontiers. Anatolia, the Balkans, the empire understood this. They hoarded the secret, not to launch new conquests, but to ensure one unbreakable rule: the city must not fall. In that specific mission, Greek fire was peerless. It turned the capital into a fortress that could outlast any storm, and it let a flickering flame of the ancient world keep burning long after the world that created it was gone. That flame wasn't of conquest, it was of preservation, and sometimes preserving a light through a long night is the most important victory. The weapon had a weakness. It was a storm in a jar, but a storm needs the right conditions. It wasn't an all-conquering thing. It was a tool, and it had vulnerabilities. The first was the weather. The sea it mastered could turn on it. A strong wind was an enemy. It could blow the fire off course or back onto your own ship. A heavy rain could douse the mixture before it even caught. It would just be an oily spray, so the operators had to wait for calm days for the right moment. They couldn't command the skies. That made it unreliable. You couldn't plan a campaign around a weapon that might fail because of a sudden squall. Then there was the machine, the bronze siphon, the force pump. They were marvels, but they were complex. Leather hoses could crack, valves could stick. The mixture, if it wasn't perfect, could clog the tube, and a malfunction wasn't just a failed attack. You're in the hold of a ship, surrounded by vats of this fuel. A single spark from a grinding part could mean disaster. The ships that carried this terror were floating bombs. One enemy arrow, one bit of flaming debris in the wrong spot, and the vessel would vanish. It would destroy itself. That danger shaped their tactics. They couldn't wade into a melee. They had to strike from a distance, a controlled distance, and then retreat. And maybe the greatest limitation was geography. Greek fire was born for the sea, for the narrow straits around Constantinople. It was useless on land. You couldn't haul a Dromon and its pressurized system across a plain. In the open field battles, the ones that decided provinces, the empire's armies fought with spears and bows and cavalry. Like everyone else, the miracle weapon stayed home. So its role was specific. It was defensive, the guardian of the harbor, the keeper of the gates. The Byzantines understood that. They never saw it as a sword for empire. It was a shield, the ultimate shield, and they built their entire naval strategy around that shield to make the sea walls unassailable, psychologically and physically. For generations, that nuanced reality, though, it didn't dim the legend abroad. The fear of it, the stories of burning water, they traveled faster than any diplomat. And that reputation began to ripple out, changing the nature of warfare in distant lands. The story of that burning sea spread well past the Bosporus. It moved with the merchants, the trade routes, the quiet stories from sailors who'd seen it, and it planted something, a dangerous idea. If the Byzantines could command a fire that water couldn't put out, then others would want that power. It wasn't a secret being passed on, it was inspiration. The real formula stayed locked away in Constantinople, but the concept, this terrible liquid flame, it started to echo. East and West, in the Muslim world, they faced it directly. The drive to counter it or to make it themselves was intense. Arab and Persian chemists, they already knew petroleum. They called it naft. They experimented. They developed their own incendiary weapons, clay pots filled with naft packed with sulfur and quicklime sealed tight. These were early grenades. A soldier would hurl one, it would shatter, and the mixture would ignite. Archers had arrows with small combustible pots attached behind the tip. Fire arrows with devastating range. These weapons were different from the Byzantine siphon system, but the principle was the same: an adhesive, persistent flame to break sieges, to shatter morale on land and sea. The Islamic world's advancements in military chemistry, they were a direct response, a response to Greek fire. It became an arms race, sparked by a single, unreachable innovation. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, the stories turned mythical. Crusaders coming back from the East brought tales, exaggerated tales. In chronicles and poems, it was a dragon's breath, a devilish artifice. This legend, stripped of its technical reality, it fueled European alchemists and military engineers. They started developing their own Greek fire. The name became a generic term for any fearsome incendiary. Recipes show up in medieval manuscripts: pitch, resin, sulfur, tallow, ingredients that could make a burning, sticky substance, but not one that defied water. These European versions were used in sieges, poured from castle battlements in cauldrons, shot in primitive projectiles. The name carried the aura of the original. A borrowed terror, even if the substance was a pale imitation. So the diffusion, it's a process. The specific, guarded technology of the Byzantine siphon never spread. But the idea of it did. The very notion traveled freely. It became a catalyst. Different cultures, with their own materials and knowledge, they looked at the problem. And they invented their own solutions. They aimed for the same effect, a fire that clung and consumed, but through different chemical paths, different mechanical paths. It shows how a technological idea can inspire parallel innovation, even when its core secret stays a black box. The shadow of Greek fire, it was long. It helped shape incendiary warfare for centuries, pushing chemists and soldiers to reach for a power they could only imagine in its perfect form. And this legacy, this echo of a flame, it brings us to the weapon's final appearance. A moment not of glorious defense, but of last, desperate hope. The year was 1204. The enemy wasn't outside the walls, they were already inside. This was the Fourth Crusade. It was supposed to go to the Holy Land, but it got turned around. It ended up attacking Constantinople, a Christian capital. The city it was meant to protect. In the final assault, the records talk about fire, fire from the walls, fire on the water, but the way they describe it, it's different from the old stories. There's no roar from a bronze tube, no mention of a liquid that burns on the sea, just fire. It feels like a weapon fading. The institutional memory, the guilds of craftsmen, the exact recipe, they'd probably worn thin after centuries of civil war, after the empire kept shrinking. What was left was just an echo, a last try to call up a ghost of the old power. It didn't work. The Crusaders broke through. They sacked the city. Constantinople fell. For the first time in almost 900 years, and when the Byzantines took their capital back 50 years later, so much was gone, looted, lost a lot of what made the empire itself. And that included, it seems, the full command of their famous weapon. The secret was already starting to dissolve. The absolute end came 250 years after that. In 1453, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II brought his huge cannons to the land walls. This time, the empire had no surprise, no miracle weapon. The great chain across the Golden Horn held for a while, but there are no good reports, no stories of the old liquid fire clearing the Ottoman fleet from the water. If any piece of the formula was left, it wasn't used, or it couldn't be used, when the walls were finally breached and the last emperor died fighting, the final keepers of the flame. Whoever they were, if they even still existed, they were silenced forever. The secret didn't leak out, it wasn't captured, it just stopped being. Its disappearance mirrors the empire's own fate. A once mighty tool, a sign of divine favor and technological supremacy, it faded into a legend, then into a rumor, then into silence, and that makes you think. What did Greek fire really mean? It was more than a weapon. For centuries, it was a physical belief, the belief that the empire was special, protected. That its civilization deserved a divine shield. Its slow loss and its total absence at the final collapse, it points to a deeper truth. A technology, no matter how brilliant, can't hold up a civilization by itself. It can buy time, which it did. It can shape strategy, shape minds, but it lives inside a system, a living system of knowledge, of institutions, of economic strength, of social bonds. When that system weakens and breaks, the fragile wonders it holds are often the first to go. The lost formula becomes a symbol of that fragility. A reminder, the most powerful secrets aren't just about what we can make. They're about how we keep the light of knowledge burning through the long, uncertain night. The weapon disappeared, but its story kept going. It lived a second life in how people imagined it. Medieval monks, in their illuminated manuscripts, turned Greek fire into a divine marvel. They painted it as golden rays coming from the hands of saints or from the bows of blessed ships. It was a visual code for heavenly help, less a technology, more a miracle. A sign written into history to prove something about faith, about destiny. That was the first change, from a chemical mix to an article of faith. Then, centuries later, Western writers found the legend again. The original secret was lost by then, so they could remake it. In poems, in adventure novels, it became this exotic, almost magical device, a tool for sorcerers or a lost ancient science. It was the mysterious wildfire of fantasy, a substance of uncontrollable power. That literary version lost its historical details. It became a universal symbol for terrifying, unstoppable combustion, and that fed right into modern culture, where it's often seen as the ancient ancestor of the flamethrower, a kind of proto-napalm. The name itself, it taps into a primal fear of a fire that can't be put out, a fear that sticks no matter the era. But for nations that see themselves as heirs to Byzantium, especially Greece, the symbol carries a different weight. A more personal one. There, Greek fire isn't just a cool old weapon. It's a symbol of brilliant ingenuity under extreme pressure, a testament to resilience. It represents a moment when cleverness and courage saved a civilization, not just brute force. It's a point of deep cultural pride. A story told to remind people they can overcome overwhelming odds. Through intellect, through resourcefulness, that national myth is powerful because it focuses not on the destruction the weapon caused, but on the preservation it made possible. So this whole journey from a tangible, terrifying tool to a flexible cultural icon, it shows something. When a technology gets tangled up with a people's story, with their sense of identity and survival, it achieves a kind of immortality. Its practical use fades, but its meaning grows. It moves from the arsenal to the art gallery, from the military manual to the history book, then to the shared stories that define a culture. It stops being about what it did. It starts being about what it meant. That symbolic life can last much longer than the physical one, shaping how people see themselves, their history, for 1,000 years after the last flame went out. But that very power, the way a tool of war becomes a celebrated legend, it makes you stop. It forces a difficult question, a necessary one. That ethical shadow is long. It asks difficult questions. Was it acceptable to create a weapon like that? For the Byzantines, the answer was clear. Their world was ending. An enemy fleet was right at the gates. Everything, their civilization, their faith, it was all hanging in the balance. In that moment, any tool that could change the outcome wasn't just justified. It became a moral imperative, a necessary evil to stop a greater one. They called it a divine gift. That framing removed the ethical burden. It wasn't a choice they made. It was a grace they received. This logic of supreme defense, it repeats throughout history. When survival is the only goal, the rules change, but then you step outside that perspective. You look at the weapon itself, a liquid that created fires water couldn't put out, a substance designed for immense suffering. Its use was horrific and largely indiscriminate. Once that stream left the siphon, you couldn't call it back. It would burn anything, sailors, ships, the water around them. The psychological terror was a core part of its design. So you sit with that tension, a tool of undeniable brutality used to preserve a culture. This isn't just an ancient problem, it's a modern one. You see it in debates over nuclear weapons or autonomous drones. The same core dilemma appears. Does having an overwhelming, terrifying weapon make conflict less likely? Does it deter aggression? The Byzantines would say yes. Their centuries of security, bought by the fear of Greek fire, seem to prove it, but that deterrence rests on a willingness to actually use the horrible thing. To cross a moral line, that's the enduring trade-off. Then there's the secret, the obsessive, compartmentalized secrecy. By locking the knowledge away in a few sworn families, they made a choice. They prioritized immediate security over the long-term preservation of the knowledge itself. They decided the risk of the weapon falling into enemy hands was greater than the risk of it being lost forever. And in the end, they lost both. The weapon faded from use and the formula vanished. That raises a profound issue: who controls transformative knowledge? Is it right for a single state or a single ruler to hold a discovery that could alter history hostage to its own survival? The Byzantine answer was a resounding yes. Our world wrestles with similar questions. Should research in artificial intelligence or biotechnology be restricted for security reasons? The balance is agonizing. Too much openness and dangerous tools proliferate. Too much secrecy and human knowledge becomes fragile. We risk losing the very innovations that could solve our biggest problems. Reflecting on this doesn't give easy answers, but it connects the smoke over the Bosporus to the boardrooms and labs of today. It shows that the challenges of technology and morality aren't new. They're human. They're about power and fear and survival and our responsibility to the future. With that framework in mind, you can finally ask the most tantalizing question. A question that shifts the gaze from the past to a road not taken. What if the secret of Greek fire had never been lost? The formulas were lost that closed a door. But if it hadn't, if that door stayed open, suppose the secret of Greek fire didn't vanish with the last Byzantine who knew it. Suppose it was written down. Copied, traveled, not as a story but as a manual. That's more than a game. It shows how fragile the timeline is. If that knowledge reached Western Europe in the 12th century, carried by a scholar, maybe a defector, the landscape of medieval warfare would have shifted. The Crusades, for instance, they were often sieges. Stone castles could hold for years. But a force with portable, pressurized siphons, or reliable incendiary grenades from the formula, that changes the calculus, the ability to project a clinging flame onto wooden gates. Over walls, it makes fortifications less secure. It could accelerate some conquests, prolong others, reshape the political map of the Mediterranean in ways we can only guess. Then the Iberian Peninsula during the Reconquista, that tool in the hands of either side, Christian or Muslim, it might have tipped key battles. The conflict was already a brutal back and forth. Adding a reliable, terrifying incendiary weapon, it could have shortened that centuries-long struggle or made it more devastating. The nature of siegecraft itself might have evolved earlier, focusing on countering fire, not just arrows and stones. And here's the point. Greek fire was a chemical path to military power. Its survival and spread would have made advanced incendiaries the central focus of military research. For centuries, that could have delayed the other great innovation, gunpowder. Why invest in unreliable black powder bombs when you have a perfected liquid flame? We might have seen a different technological tree, chemical incendiaries as the dominant siege weapon for much longer, gunpowder emerging later or in a different form. This reveals something. Lost knowledge isn't just a gap in a museum. It's a fork in the road, a path not taken. The disappearance of Greek fire pruned away one branch of chemical and mechanical engineering. Our world was built on the branch that remained. To think about that lost path is to see the contingency of history. It wasn't inevitable. It was shaped by breaks in the chain. Secrets that died with their keepers, that brings it out of the past, makes it relevant now. We are creating our own powerful formulas, our own world-altering technologies. The Byzantine dilemma is our dilemma. How do you protect transformative knowledge without ensuring its extinction? The Byzantines protected Greek fire by making it fragile. They compartmentalized the knowledge. The survival of the formula depended on a tiny, unbroken chain of human memory. That's the peril of over-compartmentalization. In any organization, an ancient empire, a modern tech firm, there's this tension between security and sustainability. You lock a secret away to prevent theft, but you also lock it away from the future. The Byzantine system had no redundancy, no fail-safes. If one master artisan passed unexpectedly, a key piece vanished forever. They prioritized immediate tactical advantage over the long-term preservation of their own innovation. And in the end, they lost both. The weapon faded from use, the formula disappeared. This isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a live issue, proprietary software code written by a single developer who leaves. The program runs, but no one knows how to fix it. It becomes a black box, a fragile asset, or government classifications. Some secrecy is necessary, but overclassification can bury vital research. For decades, when knowledge is walled off in silos, it cannot be cross-pollinated. It cannot be challenged, it stagnates, and then it becomes obsolete. The Byzantine Empire won battles for centuries with its secret, but in guarding it too closely, they guaranteed its extinction. They saved their city, but they lost a piece of their intellectual heritage. That's the cautionary tale. Security without a plan for continuity is a recipe for permanent loss, but from its very existence, a second lesson emerges. The most startling innovations come from necessity. Greek fire is a story about that. It's about ingenuity under pressure. The empire was facing an existential threat. Its entire way of life was on the brink. That pressure focused minds, it focused resources. It made them willing to take enormous risks, to listen to a refugee alchemist with a wild idea, to pour state treasure into a volatile substance, to build new machines of war around it. Survival overrode caution. It accelerated experimentation. It turned a possibility into a battlefield reality, and quickly. This pattern echoes. Think of the Second World War, the race to build the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project. It gathered the greatest scientific minds. It spent unimaginable sums, all driven by a single fear, that the enemy might get there first. That same dynamic, the race against a clear danger, propelled the COVID-19 vaccines. Global collaboration, billions in funding, regulatory barriers streamlined because the threat was immediate, it was visible, it was universal. These are sobering examples. They tell us our capacity for breakthrough is tied to imminent peril. It's a paradox. Our darkest hours can catalyze our brightest invention. For the Byzantines, the threat was a fleet on the horizon. That concrete danger created a unity of purpose. It silenced objections. It justified the costs. It justified the dangers of working with a fearsome substance. The empire wasn't trying to revolutionize naval warfare in peacetime. It was fighting for its life, and in that fight, it stumbled upon a technology that would define its defense for centuries. This isn't a celebration of crisis. It's an observation about psychology, about societal focus. When the stakes are survival, we become capable of extraordinary things. We marshal resources, we tolerate failure in pursuit of a solution. We collaborate across boundaries. The creative genius is always there, latent, but it often requires the sharp prod of necessity to be activated. It's a potent driver of progress, unsettling but potent. It suggests our greatest leaps are often reactive, not proactive. They are answers to urgent questions posed by a dangerous world. And that leads to the final lesson from the lost formula, a lesson not about chemistry or warfare, but about the nature of the story itself. That final point is perhaps the most humbling. The formula is just gone. It's a reminder of how much of the past is simply lost, irrevocably. We know Greek fire through secondary accounts, through descriptions of what it did. The roaring jets, the burning water, the panic, but we don't have the blueprint, no manual, not a single line from the people who made it. Its reality is filtered through witnesses, or through enemies who feared it. This is the fragility of the record. For every civilization, for every advanced technology, what survives is often a shadow. A fragment, a story told by survivors, the practical knowledge, the exact temperature, the stirring motion, the trick of the seal, that dies with the practitioners. It underscores a principle: preserving knowledge needs more than a vault. A vault can be looted or forgotten, or its key lost. True preservation requires sharing. It needs knowledge put into resilient forms, forms that can outlive the civilization that created them. The Byzantines chose the vault. They protected the secret so completely it couldn't survive them. Their method was perfect for security and catastrophic for legacy. In our own time, this lesson echoes. We create oceans of data, believing it lasts forever. But digital information is fragile. File formats become obsolete. Storage media degrades. Magnetic tapes lose their charge. Hard drives fail. The platforms we trust, social media archives, cloud servers, they're owned by companies that may not exist in a century. We're building a modern vault, but on a planetary scale, a vast repository that could, through technological shift or collapse, become a sealed tomb of unreadable information. The parallel is sobering. The loss of Greek fire shows no single method is foolproof. Stone tablets erode, papyrus crumbles, digital bits fade. The only defense is multiplicity. Translation into new formats, redundant storage in different places, and the maintenance of human skills to interpret the old ways. This isn't just backing up hard drives. It's preserving the context, the languages, the frameworks that give data meaning. So when we look at that lost flame, we're not just seeing a military mystery. We're looking at a mirror. It reflects our own struggle to remember, to pass things on. The story of Greek fire in its absence becomes an argument for open scholarship, for meticulous archiving, for the humble act of writing things down and teaching them widely. It argues the most precious knowledge is too important to be kept by only a few. Because those few, history shows, are always one generation away from oblivion. This realization that our past is a landscape of silent gaps makes the final chapter poignant. The formula is dust, but its presence never left. It just changed form, moving from the material world into the realm of stories and symbols and dreams. It didn't end in 1453. The flame went out, but the legend kept going. It's still here, Greek fire, but not in weapons. It's in our minds now, in documentaries where they use computers to show it burning on the water. In books and movies where it's this ancient, powerful symbol. In games, it's that weapon, the one that covers an area, and using it feels like touching a myth. That's its second life. It's not a tool anymore, it's an icon, a symbol of something mysterious, something lost, a technology that feels too advanced for its time. And that feeling, it draws people in. For scientists, for historians, it's not just a story, it's a puzzle, an active challenge. They read old texts looking for clues, for the chemistry pyrophoric reactions, things that ignite with air or water. They test mixtures, naphtha, quicklime, saltpeter. They do it in modern labs, not to make a weapon, but to understand, to see the engineering that was there 1,000 years ago. Every experiment, every paper, it's like a conversation across that time, trying to reverse engineer a ghost, to honor the ingenuity, the work of those forgotten alchemists. And on a bigger level, the lost formula means something else. It speaks to a fascination, the idea that advanced knowledge might have existed long before our modern era. It challenges the simple idea of progress, the straight line where knowledge only moves forward. Greek fire suggests something different, a model of flickering lights. Brilliant sparks that flare up in one place, in one time, and then get smothered. By time, by war, by secrecy, that idea keeps the romance of discovery alive. It says the past isn't a closed book, it's a landscape, and it still has secrets waiting in the quiet, waiting for the right question. So we started with a weapon that saved an empire. We saw it become a state secret, a tactical marvel, then a symbol, and then a silence, a gap in history. Its legacy is all these threads: chemistry, strategy, psychology, ethics. It's a story about how societies guard what they value, and how that guard, that protection, can lead to a loss. The deepest lesson might not be about making a flame burn on water. It might be about how fragile knowledge is and the responsibility that comes with it, not just to discover, but to remember, to share, to pass the light on, however faint it seems. Because that's the only defense against the long night. That final reflection brings the story back around. The story of Greek fire is more than just ancient warfare. It's about the nature of secrets. They hold immense power, but also profound peril. It's about that spark of human innovation, often lit in our darkest hours. And it's about the silence that follows when knowledge vanishes. This weapon saved the Byzantine Empire, not just in one dramatic moment, but across generations. It bought centuries of time. That borrowed time let a civilization endure. It acted as a bridge between antiquity and the modern world. It shaped the course of European history and global history in ways we're still figuring out. And yet, the irony is this: the measures taken to protect the secret, the walls of silence, the compartmentalization, those were the very things that guaranteed its loss. We're not left with a blueprint, we're left with a symbol, a cluster of unanswered questions that still draw us in. We look back at that flickering light on the water, and it makes us look forward. To consider what crucial knowledge we're safeguarding now in our own vaults, digital or otherwise, and to ask with urgency what vital understanding we might be risking. Through neglect or overprotection or just short-sightedness, the legacy of Greek fire isn't a recipe, it's a reminder that preservation is an active choice. A deliberate one. If this journey into the flames has illuminated something for you, we invite you to subscribe for more explorations into the enduring mysteries of the past. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. In the comments, tell us which lost technology, which forgotten wisdom would you most want to rediscover.